So people are gonna, if they're not aware of how they use their time, what they put their focus on, they're gonna get blackpilled because the mainstream media, governments, et cetera, they all run on propaganda and adrenal addiction. People get addicted to fear, and so if a person's not aware of that, I mean, they'll wind up, in some sense, becoming alternate narrative centered.
I wrote The Bible and Bitcoin for You, Bible-believing Christian, and in it I lay out the biblical basis for what money is, why our current fiat monetary system is ungodly, and how Bitcoin is the best and most viable, biblically compliant replacement for government fiat money. There's even a small group study guide in the back with additional resources to study with your church small group. Get it on Amazon or pay with Bitcoin at thebibleandbitcoin.com for a discount. Welcome to another episode of the Bible and Bitcoin podcast. I'm your host, Alin Armstrong, aka Pastor Coin, and today I have a guest with us, Mr. Levi M. Johnson, who is the author of several books, one of them of which we'll be talking about today, The Benefits of Bitcoin, Unstoppable Ways Bitcoin Will Upgrade the World for Everyone, Everywhere. That's a long title, I had to read it. But yeah, Levi,
buddy.
Thanks for joining me.
It's great to be on, Alan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, with a name like Levi M. Johnson, it sounds like you could start just about any business you want and name it after yourself.
Yeah, I'm pretty brandable. Yeah, and I've started a few.
You could do like Levi Johnson, anything, ice cream shop, clothing line. It works.
Exactly. I could make furniture, pants. I've maybe.
You might get sued. You might get sued.
I might though. Yeah.
But Levi is not Levi's, so I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Levi pants, not Levi's pants. That would be inappropriate.
So tell us a little bit about your journey to the Lord. I always like to hear the testimonies from Bitcoiners who are Christian because it's an interesting intersection. So tell us a bit about your journey to the Lord.
Absolutely. So my parents were Christian when I was born, and we, I grew up in a house. They were kind of classic boomer parents that listened to Pat Robertson and the 700 Club, and that kind of whole vein of things. And so it was a bit cheesy, but I grew up watching that. And so when I was after going through a ton of drug and alcohol addiction and just partying like crazy, by the age of 5, I was like, I really need to change my life. I mean, I'm kidding, but no, but I walked up to my mom one day, and I just remember thinking, at 5 years old, I need Jesus. How do I get Jesus? And I asked my mom, how do I set Jesus in my heart, is how I phrased it. And so she led me in the sinner's prayer. I mean, I was deep in it, but, God really saved me. I got saved at the age of 5. And so, some people struggle with whether or not there's a God and believing that. That was almost never a problem for me. I'm not sure why. I guess it's my temperament. But I was just like, oh, yeah, of course there's a God, obviously. And so as I was growing up and I got into my teen years, I wondered, I'm reading the Bible and I'm looking at these stories of Jesus, and there's miracles and signs and wonders and all this stuff's happening, and I'm going, okay, I love Jesus, he loves me, but where are the miracles? Where's the supernatural? And so I wound up getting neck deep into the Word of Faith movement, and while there's certainly some of that's unhealthy, I learned the power of words, and actually through that begin to understand, hey, there actually is a way to see God work in people's lives. One time my mom comes in, she'd hit her hand on something, and I'm very black and white at that point. And so she comes in and her hand's in pain. I'm like, hey, Mom, what's wrong? And she's like, oh, I just hit my hand, it hurts. And I looked at it and I'm like, no, it's not that. And I commanded the pain to leave, and it just like disappeared. And so that was like my first foray into like a living relationship with God that wasn't just on the page, but was actually real. And so yeah, and so like that's like kind of in a nutshell. Over the years, my relationship with God has grown in intimacy, and like I spent several years in like a recovery program, and in that, part of what they taught was that you're only as sick as your secrets. And so I have learned over the years to tell God all my secrets, and that has like materially changed my relationship with my wife, with people, and materially enabled me to be just more authentic and less religious, as it were. And so I don't really strive for like a super spirituality. I love God, and I want to walk with Him, but at the same time, how does that work out in real life? And so, not to go on too much of a tangent, but that's a little bit how I got into Bitcoin. Was how do these principles of the kingdom, how does the way that God operates and the way He's designed the universe work out in real life? And so that gave me a value for practical application. So anyways, yeah.
Cool. So you mentioned Bitcoin a little bit. So you're walking with the Lord, you're walking in the light. Praise the Lord for that. How do you reconcile that with your conviction in Bitcoin? Where do you see the intersection there?
Yeah, so just kind of starting from first principles, God created everything, and everything didn't like end up good. People and sentient beings, they make their choices, but in the beginning it was good. And so if God created everything, that's spiritual, psychological, and physical. And so we know just scientifically that there's first principles, but there's also first principles psychologically and spiritually. So like I used to be a professor. I've taught overseas for several years. And so, one of the countries I taught in was China. And so I taught there for about 3.5 years, but of course I can't talk about God there, and I'm there to do a job, which is to help them. I was an English language professor, but I could talk about first principles, and which sounds secular, but if God created everything, and there's first principles that run through all that exists, then I can teach those first principles. And so when I look at Bitcoin, I mean, what is Bitcoin in some sense? Bitcoin is information plus energy. And so that information is code according to certain laws. And so part of those laws are computer science, part of those laws are economic, et cetera, born out of arguably like a natural law tradition, and libertarian leaning, et cetera. There's the political aspect of it. But suffice to say that Bitcoin works based on laws God wrote. That's at least what I believe. And so if we look at those laws, we can extrapolate from them, and that's more or less how my book was born. I'm going, okay, there's lots of Bitcoiners and Bitcoin books, but like where do we get, if we look not a year down the road, but I mean, yes, right now, but also 50 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, because we're going to get there, I mean, at some point. And so if Bitcoin is truth money, then where does that take us as a civilization? How does that apply not only on a general level with the government and with companies, but how does that also apply to the individual? And so if we take a strategic view of it, we can take a tactical view, which is self-custody and running a node and running a lightning node, and if you get really serious, learning the code, et cetera, but then also a strategic view, which is if we take these first principles of Bitcoin in some sense and we extrapolate them out, how does that actually fix the world? Like, we can say fix the money, fix the world, but like to like a layman or somebody who's just coming into it, what does that actually mean? And maybe even for Bitcoiners, what does that actually mean? So I wrote Benefits of Bitcoin not only to give like someone who doesn't know much about Bitcoin but is curious some thoughts to chew on as far as the benefits, because it's like, well, why should I even participate in this system? It sounds like an interesting idea, but will it actually change humanity? Will it actually fix the world? But then also for Bitcoiners who maybe they're coming at it from a deeper like Bitcoin perspective, but they've want to gain the ability to, or at least gain some skills or some words to orange pill some normies, so to speak. And so anyways, that's part of what I'm aiming at.
So could you define, because I hear this term a lot, first principles. What does that mean?
So first principles, they are laws that in some sense can't be reduced any further. And so I'll use an example. Einstein generated from theory the special and general theories of relativity. And so the special theory applied in special circumstances, the general theory applied across the universe in every circumstance. So that's a bit esoteric, but a first principle applies in every circumstance and in some sense can't be reduced any further. So for instance, I'm a Gen Xer, and so I got into the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But what is that really? It's just first principles. So begin with the end in mind. That correlates to the biblical, to the verse, without a vision the people perish. So that's a first principle. That can be applied in every circumstance, everywhere. If I meet a lady and I want to find out, can our relationship work in the long run? Okay, what are your dreams, goals, aspirations in the long run? Where are you going? Begin with the end in mind. And where am I going? And if those mesh, then there's some hope for a relationship. If not, maybe not. Like, if I want to be in the corporate world working 80 hours a week and she wants to be a missionary in Russia, okay, that's probably not going to work out. But if our visions overlap, then that can work. And that's just, but that can be the same for 2 countries. It can be the same for the United States and another country. If the United States ostensibly wants freedom for all people in the long run, life, liberty, and property, not the pursuit of happiness, that wasn't the original phrase, but life, liberty, and property. But another country, like North Korea or something, wants like the opposite of that. Well, it's going to be hard to find common ground.
Yeah.
But so beginning with the end in mind, that's like just one first principle. Another one is seek first to understand, then to be understood. Or another first principle is begin before you're ready. Because
Yeah, that's, by the way, that's literally every parent ever.
yeah, right, exactly, yeah,
Begin
that's one.
before you're ready. People tell me
Yeah,
all the time, I'm not ready to have kids. Nobody ever is.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah, that's one of the. I mean, if you read like the autobiography of Andrew Carnegie, one of the ways that he's a bit of an obscure historical figure, but one of the ways that he achieved so much success is that he took measured risk relative to his context and the situation, because there's no material way for a person to know everything, and so while first principles in some sense can't be used in every situation, because you can't literally just stop and think in every single situation, what's the first principle that applies here? Okay, that's not going to be efficient, but if you inculcate those and get them down into your intuition, into your, in some sense, your subconscious mind, then they can inform you in situations, especially if it's a stressful situation or a new
Right.
situation.
Right.
And that enables you, in some sense, to do what, like Jordan Peterson might talk about as converting chaos into order.
Right.
Not perfect order, just enough to function, you know.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
it's almost like you get to practice it. It's like a muscle, right? You get to
Yeah.
study, you know the first principles, you
Yeah.
know, and after a while, when you are in a stressful situation, it becomes like a muscle memory and you can
Yeah.
apply those things. Like when COVID was happening and all that stuff, I had been so deep into the principles of God's word that it was easy to
Yeah.
see what was happening here.
Exactly.
It was like just muscle memory, boom, boom, boom,
Yeah.
no problem. Whereas other people were thrown for a loop in utter chaos
Yeah.
because they're not living in the first principles of God's word. So
Yep.
when something like that
Exactly.
comes, th- you know,
They're washed away.
they're washed away. I almost feel like, I shouldn't say feel like, because that's not a first principle way to make decisions, but it seems to me that first principles are just discernment. Being able to discern in the moment what the right thing is, based on pre-fabricated principles already built into the universe by God who created it.
Yeah. Well, what you're talking about is akin to wisdom.
Right.
So wisdom is an internal map of reality. But what is that map composed of? To your point, that map, like you take first principles and you interweave them. And then that becomes, in some sense, the worldview through which I or people, again, to your point, distinguish in certain situations. And so, and so that's where that discernment comes from, because I'm able to look at two situations or multiple situations that seem similar, but no, actually they're different.
Yeah.
And here's the reason. And to actually be able to not only tell the difference from like an intuitive or guttural level, but also from an articulate level.
Yeah.
And because I could, you know, like if we're looking at like the lockdowns or something like that, I can go just from basic logic, well, if 80,000 people a year are dying from the flu, and it's the same or less for this new thing that's coming along, and the externalities to this are going to ruin the lives of like millions more. Okay, the cure can't be worse than the disease.
Right.
Okay, so we need to take a different approach to this, just from a logical perspective. Of course, I can't control how the world governments decide to move forward on those things. But being able to make those distinctions and to have that discernment from first principles, to your point, because you have not only the spiritual principles of God's word and out of the relationship and intimacy with God, but also the handwriting of God in the universe itself, the constants and gravity and psychology, relationships, etc., then when we look at any particular circumstance or decision, there's a whole slew of sight that comes to us in some sense, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So you wrote your book, The Benefits of Bitcoin, and the title itself, just reading it, it makes one optimistic, right? How unstoppable ways Bitcoin will upgrade the world for everyone, everywhere. That sounds really nice, right? Like, wow, you already know going into this book, it's going to be filled with optimism and hope for the future. Why did you choose to write a book that takes the optimistic route in a time when almost everyone is pessimistic about the future?
Sure. Yeah. Well, okay. So, like, this goes to a first principle of psychology. What people focus on becomes bigger. So, a person can, and a person becomes, in some sense, what they focus on for an extended period of time. So, I'm a relatively optimistic person. I'm relatively positive. I can certainly have my dark moments. My wife can attest to that. Oh wait, she just said that I'm perfect in every way. Oh well. Anyways, I know that, but I've got her fleeced. No, so the way that God's universe works out is he is unbeatable. There's no one shrewder, there's no one wiser, there's no one smarter, there's no one more intelligent. And so the way that the enemy works, and this leads to a lot of pessimism and like kind of blackpilling for a lot of people, is he tries to get people to believe there is no hope. Nothing will get better. You can't change. You can't improve. Your marriage is going down the toilet. The leaders, they're incompetent. They can't help you. And so people are gonna, if they're not aware of how they use their time, what they put their focus on, they're gonna get blackpilled, because the mainstream media, governments, et cetera, they all run on propaganda and adrenal addiction. People get addicted to fear. And so if a person's not aware of that, I mean, they'll wind up, in some sense, becoming alternate narrative centered. And then that's gonna lead them to very unhealthy, dysfunctional places. And furthermore, it's not true.
Right.
So absolutely bad things happen, bad things have happened, bad things will continue to happen, but arguably humanity is in a better place than it's ever been in all of human history.
Right.
Humanity and the earth, for all the darkness, and there are terrible things that are going on, humanity is arguably closer to what heaven looks like than it's ever been. It's never been more orange-pilled in all of human history. There have never been more nations that are using it. There have never been more merchants that are using it. And so what I'm interested in, like one of my books I wrote called What is Truth? The Nature of Reality and the, well, anyways, it's a book that's focused on truth and reality. And so the deepest reality is that, to my book's title, there's about 5 pillars that are required for an earth that looks like heaven. And so one of those is sound money. But what is sound money? Sound money is just money that speaks the truth. So there's the idea of signal versus noise ratio. Well, if Bitcoin as sound money speaks the truth, and that is not, of course, not the only, but an important aspect of interpersonal relationships and international relationships, then there's a profound, intense level of truth being spoken between everyone more than ever before. And so, one of the ways that people attain hope is okay, they can feel it, absolutely, and that's valid. But also, sometimes, so there's true hope and there's false hope, and we want true hope. We acknowledge the problems, but then we go, okay, but here's actual solutions. This is what we're actually going to do about that. And so when we look at Bitcoin and we apply that in, like as I did in the book, in a variety of different situations, we see this is how it materially actually changes things. And then that, when people realize, oh, the future that I articulate in the book, this hopeful future, this isn't something that is optional. Because truth money exists, and arguably because God exists and Bitcoin is a tool of God, that this positive future we're looking at is inevitable. It can't be stopped. All the governments and all the world and all the most powerful people could lie and cheat and murder and do all the things that they possibly want, and it would be horrible, but they still wouldn't be able to stop it. And so like in one of Ayn Rand's books, one of her characters says, the question isn't who's going to let me, the question is who's going to stop me. And while I don't necessarily agree with the underlying philosophy in there because it's very like humanistic, that sentiment of there is a man, Jesus, and there is an idea that can't be stopped, and personally I go, okay, well, without Jesus, Bitcoin doesn't exist. The intellectual evidence and the historic evidence is relatively clear on that. Because without Jesus, there's no science that people can actually hope for. So hope, through this book, I want to give people a strong orange and white pill dose so that they realize, oh, no, actually, the future is going to be good. And if I decide to join this movement and fight for this, it's going to end up well, even in the face of evil.
In your book, you make some pretty bold claims. You mentioned a little bit about marriage. You say that Bitcoin will benefit marriages and increase fatherhood.
Yeah. Yep.
Which
That's
is
great.
which, you know, upon first reading, if you're new to Bitcoin, you might read that and go, what? How in the world does a digital money increase fatherhood?
Yeah.
And benefit marriages for that matter? Now, I know how that happens,
Yeah.
right? But tell
But
the
most
people out
people-
there, what in the world are you talking about? How do those two things intersect in that way?
Absolutely. Well, to set the stage or the context for this, we first need to understand the damage that fiat money has done to fatherhood, at least in the United States. So over the last arguably 70 or 80 years, actually since like the early 1900s, but as the United States has gotten off a gold standard in the early 1900s, and then as most people know, with Nixon in 1971, got off the gold standard. Essentially what that does is it gives the government a blank check to institute any kind of program that they want. So I'm not against safety nets, but I am picky about who implements the safety nets, because from an economics and a psychological perspective, no man or woman is better than their incentives. So what happens economically and psychologically when the government has a blank check is there's no penalty for bad ideas. There's no like, if they implement as they did welfare ideas that one I will say non-truth-telling president in the United States said we would have those, but he's talking about African Americans voting Democrat for 200 years. But why is that? He's instituting incentives. And so what we have in America there, and then just across, basically all the races, is you have incentives in at least the United States context for women to have children outside of wedlock because the government will support them.
Right, yeah.
So if you want people to do more of something, incentivize them to do it. And one incentive is money. Just pay them to do it. Yeah. And so if I can, so that the war against poverty has created more poverty because they're paying for the poverty to increase. Right. Most people don't understand how money works. Like, you get more of what you pay for. So if you give people money who don't understand how to use money, you're going to get more of their natural inclinations, their way that they're living. So all that to say that because of those programs and because of that incentive from the government to fatherlessness, men have needed to take less responsibility, and so men and women in that context can essentially extend their adolescence and extend their immaturity, and they don't need to pay the price for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the context, at least in the American context, but it would play out the same in any other country, because incentives and constraints set culture. And so how does Bitcoin change that? So if and when, it's not even an if, but when governments are forced to adapt a Bitcoin standard, it's going to happen. It may be 5 days, it may be 5 years, it may be 50 years, but every government will eventually adapt a Bitcoin standard, because there won't be any other way for them to sustain. Their budgets are going to be limited. And so because their budgets will be limited, if they execute on bad ideas, they actually will pay the price for it. They won't be able to print their way out of their mistakes. If they put in place a welfare program, that welfare program, because they won't be able to print their way out of their mistakes, will actually need to contribute to social welfare. I don't personally believe it's even their place, but they'll be constrained to that. And so what that results in is men and women that will need to take responsibility for their actions. So need is not the same thing as responsibility. So if a man or a woman or children have a need for food, shelter, etc., that's not the same thing as somebody else being responsible to meet that. So what happens in the context of a Bitcoin-run government and a Bitcoin society is that it's much more difficult for the government to take from you and give to someone else. They can still try to do it, but because governments will need to compete for citizens, as like the sovereign individual gets into, the incentives will be for, there will be a real price if a man and a woman get together and they have kids, and there won't be nearly as much of a social safety net to step in. So they'll be incentivized to think, oh, I better actually think about, do I actually want to marry this person? Or can this man or can this woman actually fulfill the role of fatherhood? So I expand on it more in the book, but that's like a basic nutshell of what those incentives and constraints look like and how Bitcoin contributes to the increase in fatherhood.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I'm in Canada, and the way things are here, there's a lot of government handouts that happen here. I don't know what it's like where are you, in California?
Yeah, it's
I'm
a
sure
welfare state.
I'm sure it's similar.
Oh yeah.
Just this month there have been climate change incentive payments made to people. There's been several different low-income payments made. It's not called welfare. It's like subsidy this, subsidy that, this fund.
Right.
Just tons of payments going out to people. Then we have a thing here called child tax benefit. So when you have children, each child, depending on your income, you get a certain monthly thing. And it's not like just it's everyone gets it, right?
Yep.
If you file your taxes, you get these payments. Some people get less, some people get more, but generally speaking, almost everyone gets these payments.
Yeah.
And for the lower income people, it's helpful for them. For the upper income people, they don't really care because they don't really need it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, when you have a inflationary money, like when rent costs $2,800 a month for a 2-bedroom house, getting $2,000 a month
makes no
for
difference.
Having a couple kids is still not enough.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
You still can't even pay your rent, even with so the cost of living is getting so crazy that I could see how that would affect fatherhood and affect families. And it's not, I don't think it's because families and dads don't want to make it on their own. It's that when you centrally plan money, you force the vast majority of people to not be able to, no matter how hard they work, make it on their own. And so that hinders marriages, that hinders families, that hurts fathers, and demoralizes a whole people. And that's why I think personally Bitcoin is so necessary, because it will allow families to become independent from the state again. And that, as far as I'm concerned, you can't really put a price on that kind of freedom.
Yeah. Well, and it also when a family, when a couple, to your point, when a couple and a family are using broken money, then that's taking, depending on the inflation rate, that's taking something like 7, 14 into the 20s or more percent of their time per year if they're employees. If they're using Bitcoin, it flips on its head. In the last year, Bitcoin is something like 100%. So they have 100% of their time back, economically speaking, relative to 20-something% loss of time that they're not needing, that they would need to work otherwise. And so if they had that broken money in their marriage, it if some marriages are more functional and healthy than others, but if there's a marriage that's on the lower end of functional and healthy, and then you add in the stress of a debasing money,
Yeah.
which equals increasing rents, food, fuel, energy, et cetera, it can threaten that marriage because people are going, I need to escape the stress somehow.
Yeah.
Of course, getting out of the marriage is not going to fix it because the inflation's still there, but that's what people think.
Exactly. Exactly. It's so, so important. And I think especially among Christians where we want marriages to stay together and families to flourish, and we've forgotten, or not forgotten, ignored this
Yeah.
glaring problem.
Yeah.
You cannot address this, the divorce crisis in the family, the fatherlessness and the lack of men taking charge. And so you can't address that without this elephant in the room that's crushing
Exactly.
us.
Yep.
It's like no amount of counseling is going to fix that problem. We need to address that problem. And I
Yeah.
hope that, this podcast and the work that, we're doing sheds light on that. It's like, hey, by the way, there's this 150,000-pound elephant in the corner that's taking a dump everywhere.
Yep.
We need to clean that up before we can,
Yeah. Well, and
fix this.
one of the points I make in the book is I go, okay, like, let's compare the money that a family uses to like a CPA. Like, let's say someone gets a CPA, and a CPA, in at least in a monetary sense, is an intimate part of that marriage household economics of that relationship. So let's say that CPA is undependable, lies, does things late. Is that going to enhance the marriage or detract from the marriage? It's going to detract from the marriage if that couple allows that CPA to continue to run their finances. They might get in trouble with the government, et cetera, et cetera. So, but they're debasing fiat money is the same thing. It constantly lies every day, every month, every year about the value, about their household finances. And so people end up depending on fiat money in a way that they would never put up with a CPA, but it's at least as intimate.
Yeah. Bitcoin Well is a non-custodial Bitcoin platform in Canada and the USA. That means every single Satoshi you buy goes straight to your self-custody. They offer free withdrawals, a simple 1% spread, and they have the Bitcoin Wishing Well, where you can win up to 1 million Satoshis by earning points and throwing the coin in the well. In fact, you get 5 coin tosses to the Bitcoin Wishing Well when you sign up at bitcoinwell.com/pastorcoin.
So yeah.
So we've talked a bit about government and how Bitcoin might help fix incompetent government. Now that phrase, incompetent government, is a bit of an oxymoron. It's sort of redundant at this point. I don't know that I've found a competent government yet. So we can just say, when you say government or incompetent government, it's the same thing. However, in light of, I had a guest on recently who told me, I think it was it cost the city of New York either 80 or 800, I can't forget the number, for a single screw to put up a sign.
Right.
I think it was $80 per screw. Like, that's crazy. But anyways, in light of government and Bitcoin and technology and a bright future, I tend to think Bitcoin and the technologies that it will enhance will, in time, I don't know how long, but in time will actually obsolete the states, where technology will be doing what the state tries to do but does so poorly. It will do it so much better and so much cheaper that they just will become irrelevant. What do you think of that? Do you think Bitcoin is a catalyst for this sort of sovereign individual thesis where people will be individually sovereign because technology will allow them to be, and the state will just be
Yeah.
so irrelevant they won't even exist.
Yeah, my personal view on this is I think that government has been monetized. And so the incompetence of government is downstream from that monetization.
Yeah.
So let's project into the future. Let's say we're 100, 200 years from now. There are going to be, aside from Bitcoin, but it's going to be a great help, the world will be a lot better. But there will still be evil people. And so one of the ideas that I argue is that in some sense, I mean, there's practical workings, but in some sense, the role of government is to stay out of the way of productive people and stop those people who would get in the way of productive people. Of course, some of that responsibility can be taken on by people. That's why we have the Second Amendment. But that's basically what I think the role of the government is. So I don't see the government going away completely, but I do see it being reduced greatly. Because what's going to happen is as Bitcoin proliferates and as technology proliferates, you can think of the things that the government does, companies do, individuals do, communities do, et cetera, et cetera. There are boundaries between these that are, in some sense, immutable. And so when a particular organization takes on a responsibility that's not theirs, then bad things happen, essentially. It's like, it's similar to if I'm feeding and clothing my 3-year-old child, that's appropriate for that time. But if I'm feeding and clothing my 30-year-old capable child, that's a dysfunctional situation. So when it comes to government, if it's good at accomplishing certain tasks relative to the other competitors in the market, then that's a good thing. If it's actually good, if it's not violating the boundaries or the first principles between people and states and God, etc. Because like what we have right now with fiat is we have government that thinks it's God.
Yeah.
And that is, in some sense, the deepest problem. Like, oh, okay, I think I'm God, I think I know better than everybody else. Okay, I can finance that bad idea, and I don't need to pay for the consequences.
Yeah.
So I think the future looks like, I think we need government, but I think it needs to be much smaller, much more localized, and I think that between technology as a deflationary force and a force that can take on responsibilities that the government was serving, because basically people will go in the future, in 100 years, 200 years, 1,000 years, people will go, oh, this government in my locality, like in the United States, it'd be a county, and in other countries, they name their regions different things. Oh, they're not doing a good job. Okay, I'll just switch to the other county. And then that government will go, oh, okay, they're holding us accountable. I guess we better change. Because, yeah, and so, which happens today, you know, with like wealthy people that live in their boats. It's like if they're going to tax us, okay, we'll just sail 20 miles that way and we'll be fine. And so the locational arbitrage, humanity's used that for, you know, all of human history. and they'll continue to use that, and that will force government into a position where they mind their own business. But I think that a lot of the responsibilities of government on a Bitcoin standard will gradually shift from the government to the individual, to the family, to local organizations, like roads. Well, the government doesn't need to take care of the roads. That can be people. It's not a government exclusive task. There's a notion that if it's important, the government needs to do it. It's actually the opposite of that. So we'll gradually move to not only an individual version of meritocracy, but also a corporate and a governmental version of meritocracy. If they do a good job, we'll give them our money. If they don't do a good job, we won't do that. And then people will live in exactly the kind of context that they want to live in.
Well, Levi, it's been really great talking with you. Tell people where they can find you, where they can get your book.
Absolutely. So my books can be found at levijohnson.net. And if you want to follow me and hear my thoughts before they go into books, you can follow me on Noster at Levi Writes Books, and it's the same on Twitter.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Make sure to go follow Levi on his different platforms. Check out his books. And I hope this was a blessing to everyone. Until next time, grace and peace. Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Your family, your nation, and your world needs strong men. The devil wants men weak, emasculated, and addicted to porn. This is why I designed the Slaying the Beast course to help men take back the dominion porn stole from them. This course will help you discover your identity as God's image, how porn leverages and twists that against you, and how with God's help you can turn the tables on the beast and live free. There's also access to a Discord server where you can have fellowship with others in the fight. You do not have to wait any longer to conquer this beast once and for all. Go to lifegiverchurch.net to get started today.